Good afternoon. Welcome to K-12 Budget. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I'd open us up with any requests for bill introductions. Committee? Looks like there are no bill introductions. And we're going to begin with an informational briefing before we open our two hearings today. The first one is from Gabrielle, and she's going to give us a little information background on credit recovery. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, committee. My name is Gabrielle Hull. I'm a fiscal analyst with Legislative Research. I was asked to provide a quick overview on credit recovery options to 19 and under students in Kansas. You should have a pink page in front of you that I'll refer from. There is no state level dedicated credit recovery program administered by KSDE. In addition, there are no state level specific eligibility requirements for students to enroll in credit recovery courses, and no state level funding mechanisms specific to credit recovery. Instead, credit recovery issues are managed at the local school district level, and credit recovery options are available to students through virtual schools, summer school, and alternative schools and education service centers. Any funding utilized is at the district's discretion. The memo provides a quick breakdown of all of those three options. Under virtual schools, dedicated funding is not available. That would be through our state aid formula for full-time and part-time virtual students. On the back, there's a quick overview of summer school as well. Summer school programs are not exclusive to credit recovery, but districts at their discretion can include those types of courses in their summer programs. And then finally, alternative schools and education service centers. The students attending those centers operated by a school district do receive state aid in the same manner as students attending traditional schools. However, depending on the structure of that alternative school or education center, many of the weighting factors in our finance formula might not apply to those students. The credit course cost as well for those schools and centers is set at the discretion of those schools and centers, and the responsible paying party, whether that's the student or the school district, is subject to the contract this school or center would have with the school district. And I'm happy to stand for questions.
Committee, any questions for Gabrielle? All right, thank you for the overview. Next committee, we will invite Nick to come and talk to us about House Bill 2512.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee, House Bill 2512 deals with the virtual school finance system. And what this bill would do, Gabby provided a brief overview of the current finance system, full-time, part-time, and then also for that adult per course funding amount. But what this bill would do is that it would provide funding on a per course basis for those students who are under the age of 19 that have an earned credit to expected credit ratio of less than 75% for their cohort class year. So these students would be falling behind. The bill would authorize virtual schools to receive the same amount of aid for these students as they receive for adult students, which is $709 per passed course. And I'd be happy to stand for any questions, Madam Chair.
Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So instead of the flat $5,000 fee, whether they pass or not, the fee would only be $700 per credit, but they have to pass and actually complete the course.
So this would provide an option. So full-time virtual would still be funded at the $5,000. I will note that this bill doesn't exempt these specific students from full-time virtual aid as well. Just something to keep in mind. This bill does exempt these students who are falling behind, with that 25% behind, from receiving part-time virtual aid. But these students would receive $709 per pass course, up to 6 courses per year, if they're in that 25% behind group.
So it's more or less it's prorated.
I don't know that I quite follow.
Courses, $700 a course is around 5,000.
It's close. It's a little, yeah, 4,000, some 200 or something like that, I think, if you do the math.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, so please go over with us again. So if you were counted on September 20th for virtual school and the state of Kansas paid $5,000 for you, and then you disappeared, and in February, let's say entity found you and said, look, we're going to help you, you're basically dropped out because, so then would the Kansas be paying twice for this? They pay the 5,000 and then they would pay $709 for up to 6 hours per year.
So this funding would still be determined on that September 20 count date. So these students would have to be attending school on that and be counted. Well, I'd have to, let me backtrack on that. Let me confirm that. And let me confirm how the adult students are counted and whether those adult students are also counted on the 2 days surrounding that September 20 count date, because these students would be counted that same way.
Okay, because it says that for students enrolled in virtual school. So to be enrolled and counted, then I would think that they would need to be counted on that count date before October 4th. And therefore, they would be funded.
I believe it all is contingent upon being counted on those, that essentially that September 20 count day to be funded as an enrolled virtual student.
But as the bill is currently written, it is possible that, well, it would be possible, it would be not possible, it would be the case that they are enrolled, they are counted, they are paid for, and Kansas would then be saying, okay, they've dropped off the radar, and so now we're going to go back and pay for them $709 per hour. So up to $4,254 more for that single student.
So one part of the bill on page 2, you'll notice in the part-time virtual school piece, and this is what I alluded to earlier, that new language there specifically exempts these students who are under the age of 19 that are qualifying for this per course-based virtual state aid from receiving part-time virtual funding as well as this per course virtual funding. That same.
How would that be possible if they were delinquent after the day of let's say they begin, they don't finish at semester, so therefore they're behind now. So then it's February, and now they're 75%. They have less than 75%. So they have already been paid for as full-time because maybe they started out that way. I'm just trying to distinguish who we're picking up here.
Yeah, and you'd be picking up the kids that are those 75%, or 25% behind. But I'm not quite sure on when that, if a student takes one course and becomes 24% behind, does this funding tick off and go away, and then they'd have to essentially be funded under another either full-time or part-time virtual? I'm not certain, and I don't know that I can answer that question by the specific language of this bill.
Okay, thank you. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologize for walking in the middle of the discussion here, but my understanding is what we were trying to also, I guess, accomplish are those kids that are not necessarily just in virtual school, but those that maybe were in a regular school, and then they've dropped out and now we're wanting to try to bring them back in, but they maybe don't want to come back into regular school, but this is an opportunity to help them finish out their career. So is that what this is doing, or is it just simply those that have already been in virtual school that it's picking up?
Well, they'd have to be enrolled in the virtual school to be in this program, but those students that you're referring to would essentially enroll in the virtual school. as a 25% behind student, presumably from a brick and mortar school district. And then they would be eligible to receive this per course funding amount.
Okay, so they don't have to have already been, they don't have to have gotten behind in a virtual school.
No,
Okay, that's what I want to make sure that, because it's kind of, so when they enroll though is still, I guess, the issue then of when they enroll in the virtual school is kind of the issue that the chairman is bringing out then, is when that's gonna kick in for payment.
Yeah, I think what the chair, and correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Chair, I think what you're referring to is if a kid is enrolled in virtual school and starts falling behind in virtual school, then would this funding kick in, and how would that all play out?
And currently, most school districts don't allow you to enroll in virtual school except for in the fall, and then some allow at semester, which I think is great. But I think we want to make sure that this bill does what it's intended to do. So that's why I'm asking questions. I'm not sure if we've really been able to capture that yet. The other question is, and you touched on it, Representative, is the idea, what if they are currently enrolled in a public school? They have not dropped off, they have not dropped out, but they are, really at a loss, when they're not getting their classes and they're failing their classes. So are we allowing it for those students? And so there's a lot of questions, but I think we at least understand what the bill as drafted will do.
And I also want to note that the State Department of Education oversees virtual schools and the virtual school funding. And they do a great job at also kind of setting forth policies and in which and the guidelines with which funding would be applicable or not. So the State Department of Education might be there to fill in some holes as well if this bill moves on as is.
Yes, I think that'd be very helpful if we had Kansas Department of Education kind of help us run through the different scenarios of what it would look like for different students with credit recovery, those students that have dropped out or on the verge of dropout. What does that look like? Where are these kids? And if we understand that and how they're met, reached, paid for, not paid for, that will help us make sure this bill does what it was intended to do. Representative Estes, question?
Yes, thank you. And on that list, I've had a parent reach out to me and say they're concerned, and I don't know if this is, I don't have evidence of this, so it's certainly not an accusation, that third-party virtual school vendors are paying a recruitment fee of some sort or award to families they recruit. So in that list of what's allowable and not allowable, I'd like to know if state law allows that payments to be made to families who are recruited for virtual schools.
I'm not aware of any provision in state law that deals with that specific issue, but we can look into it.
So there's not a specific prohibition, but maybe the Department of Education could even give us some information on that. Okay, great. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just referencing a question from one of my superintendents in one of my area schools. May not have read it right. There seems to be some discrepancy if a student is enrolled 75% to 99%. Looks like a student in this case would be funded at $1,700, where a student enrolled less than 75% could get funded at up to $4,245.
So that would be if that student was a part-time virtual student, a part-time FTE virtual student, they're funded at that $1,700 times their FTE. And what I think you're referring to, that between that 75% and 99%, if they're not a full-time student, they're not funded at the full-time amount, and they're not hitting that credit ratio requirement. So they would most likely be a part-time virtual student under the virtual school funding formula. Again, that kind of goes back to where where in this bill does that 75% credit earning and the 25% behind, when exactly does that tick off? Tick off the students' list and kick them back over to a normal student who's kind of on track again.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I have confidence we're going to get this all figured out. Any other questions for Nick before we open our hearing? All right, thank you, Nick. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will officially open our hearing for House Bill 2512. And we have a proponent here, one singular opponent, Christian Starner. Welcome. She's Vice President of Graduation Alliance. Welcome.
Hi, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Hopefully my testimony will be able to answer some of the questions that you've presented. So good afternoon. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. My name is Christian Starner, and I am here today on behalf of Graduation Alliance. We are an organization that has over a decade and a half experience reconnecting and re-engaging students and adults that have either dropped out of high school or on the verge of dropping out of high school. Our organization has extensive experience re-engaging former students in particular, working directly with over 30,000 students across the nation in states such as Florida, Indiana, Arkansas, Washington, Michigan, and Indiana, just to name a few. So our current estimates are that there are likely, and you will hear me circle back to this, that there are likely around 24,000 Kansans between the ages of 16 and 19 that have dropped out of high school. And what this legislation seeks to do is to establish a framework and expand upon the current diploma completion program that would allow districts, school districts, to address dropouts 19 years of age and under. So it's people that have already dropped out of high school, which is the intent of what House Bill 2512 is seeking to do. And what this would do is it would incentivize and encourage school districts to identify those students, to re-enroll them, and to provide them support services to get them re-enrolled and re-engaged back in school. And I just want to clarify, you'll hear me say this probably multiple times, this is geared at the students that either cannot or will not attend school. This is geared at those students that have already dropped out of school. So as I mentioned, Kansas currently has an adult workforce diploma program operating in the state that is administered by the Central Plains School District, and it is a statewide program. It has been incredibly successful. Graduation Alliance is working in partnership with the Central Plains School District, and actually at the time I submitted my testimony, I looked at the dashboard, and the numbers on that particular day were that we had 345 adults graduate the program since its inception of June of 2020. I looked at it again last night, and that number was up to 366. So the program is working very well, and this is seeking to expand upon the success of that current adult high school completion diploma program. So again, so the intent is to build upon the success of that program that is already in place. And really what I think that this is some of the questions that a couple of the representatives have brought up, what this would allow it to do is to take that, I don't want to call it a count date because it's more than just one date, but take that current enrollment period in the fall and expand it to be able to do it throughout the year. So when a student drops out, that school district, if that student is ready to come back, they faced challenges and they're ready to come back, they can re-engage when they are ready. So have a program that meets them when they're ready to get back into school. And this would allow those school districts to do that. That's the intent. In our experience in working with this population, over 80% of the students that drop out do so for non-academic reasons. And that's a pretty significant number. And I say that because these students are typically dropping out, for non-academic reasons. They've had extenuating life circumstances that don't allow them to keep track and pace of their peers and maybe a traditional student, for lack of a better term. And so what this would do is offer them flexibility if they have dropped out, that district, their home district, can identify them and re-engage them and bring them back into the program at any time of the year. So again, it's just the additional tool for resources. I don't want to read through this. One thing I do want to mention is that this is not intended to be a replacement or to compete with credit recovery programs. Credit recovery programs have their place and they are needed in the state. They work well if a student is behind or they need help in getting a credit to get them where they need to be to career or to continue with their high school trajectory. But this is a different use case. Dropout recovery is a completely separate use case, and this is for the students that have dropped out, not the student that might be behind a couple of credits. And then one example, so for another state that's doing this, so in 2012, Michigan passed legislation, so they're one of the longer running programs, of course, that would enable a separate seat time waiver, and then it had an accompanying funding for a dropout recovery program. And so what this did in Michigan is that it minimizes the financial risk on the state because they're paying for the dropouts to, enter back into the program, but it's paying for those students that are making consistent progress towards their diploma completion, as opposed to an enrollment, if that makes sense. So, paying for that student based on, progression. And it also maximizes opportunities for those local school districts to serve the students, not just on a yearly or an annual count over a period of time, but through the year. And then one thing I also want to note, and I apologize if I'm going over too much, but as obviously, the committee could take this under consideration, but one of the things that I had noticed was on page 2, I believe it was line 6 and 14, at least on my printout, but I assume it's the same on yours. The language should read 19 years of age and under. I think there's 2 instances of that, as opposed to students under 19 years of age. And that just is in order to not exclude somebody that's 19, because the way it reads, it could maybe have one of those, technical unintended consequences and implications. So, and again, I know this has been mentioned, the intent of this is by no means to double dip. This is not trying to go after and I say this loosely, but a traditional student who's maybe looking for an alternative full-time, virtual school environment. This is intended for the students that have completely disengaged. They have dropped out, and it just is to allow those school districts to locate and re-enroll and support. So I'll pause there and see if anybody has any questions.
All right, we do have questions.
Okay.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so I might have to refer to Nick too on this because I'm not sure. So I don't think which we've already talked about, I don't think we're quite where we want to be, because if I'm understanding the way this reads, if a student, if you contract with a school district that doesn't have a virtual school, then that school that the student has dropped out of is not going to be the one that receives the funding. It would be the virtual school that the student gets enrolled into. Now, if the school district has a virtual school also, then it would. But Nick, am I understanding that right? Is that?
Well, it would depend on the count when that student is counted. I mean, if they're counted in the school district on September 20th of the year, and then they drop out later, the funding formula would still have that student in there for that year.
Are you saying that there are 133 public schools that have virtual schools?
Right.
But there are 286 total. So that means that in order for, as this bill is drafted, in order for you, Graduation Alliance, to approach a school district and help them with recovery, they would have to have a virtual school.
That's what I was asking.
okay, Nick, is that correct? In order for that to work? Or is it that Graduation Alliance provides the location, the support, and the support happens to be your own virtual school program, which we don't fund, but now we're funding in this different way?
So.
Is that correct?
Well, if I'm understanding correctly, so this would follow the same funding mechanism that the Adult Workforce Diploma program that Kansas has had operational since June of 2020. So that's the one that's run through the Central Plains School District, but it's that statewide program. It was my understanding, and that is the intent, that it would be funded in that same mechanism, which is it is a pay for credit completion. So, and that's how the adult program does it. The state only pays for outcomes and milestones, which is credits earned and diploma completed.
Okay, yeah, but so do you have your, does Graduation Alliance then have their own online school?
Yes, and so,
Okay, so if you contract with a school district that doesn't have an online school.
yes.
Then your online school would then take that place.
Yes, and then,
Okay.
and one other thing I forgot to mention is that this would enable a district to do this program on their own as well. They do not have to contract with a provider. They can, of course, but they could also do it on their own, or they could utilize our curriculum, which is a regionally accredited program. It's has the same accreditation as the
They would
high
have to have
schools.
a virtual school within their school to do it. No, they wouldn't? Well, if they use your program, they wouldn't, but if they do it on their own, they would have to. They wouldn't have to?
So Nick, the way it's written is that they're enrolled in a virtual school. And in Kansas, you're going to have to use a public school to get your payment for your virtual school. So with these questions, I think we keep getting more confused.
Virtual schools, although under the purview of school districts, are kind of a separate item from schools. They're funded separately. They're separate from the school funding formula. So even though a student is maybe in a district that doesn't have a virtual program, the student could attend a virtual school in another location, and that virtual school and the enrollment of that student would flow through that virtual school.
Right, but the school district that they're delinquent in or that they dropped out of would not be the one that got the payment. And that's, I guess, the way it was intended, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say, obviously, we would, we're looking for solutions here. And so any suggestions that the committee has on finessing that language, it gets a little complicated because the state of Kansas doesn't have a well-defined, it doesn't have a well-defined definition of what constitutes a dropout. And so that's where that 75% of credits earned, the ratio of credits earned versus, credit, or where the student has earned their credits versus where they're supposed to be tracking. That's where that came from. But we're obviously more than welcome to work with the committee on what that definition looks like in order to make sure that you're getting the right students in the right program.
Well, thank you. I think it's
Sure.
I think it's a great idea. We need to try to flush this out.
Absolutely.
Figure it all out. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I think we're getting closer. All right, Representative Tarwater.
I'm almost there. Bear with me on this. So can a school like in Spring Hill District, for example, that has a good virtual school, can they go out and seek out these individuals that have dropped out of high school in other areas and say, hey, we can be an option for you and they'll qualify for this program if they're 19 and under and have dropped out of high school, whatever definition that is, and are 75% behind, they would be able to enroll wherever they'd like that's a virtual school?
Yes, it would enable any school district in the state to identify and give them that extra flexibility to identify, re-enroll, and then provide those support services, whatever that looked like to them. Obviously, we have best practices and what that support, that robust support system looks like, because this population of students, need additional support to have success.
Okay, when we're done figuring that out, I might have a few other questions on how things work.
Okay, and I actually, committee, Nick, did you have a comment? Because yes, you go, and then I'm going to provide a little
I
suggestion.
just wanted to kind of correct something I said. I looked at the KSD enrollment handbook to confirm how adult virtual is funded. And adult virtual is funded on the per course basis of past course, irrespective of the count date. So it is just, it's funded based on that per course. That the count date does not matter.
Yeah, the adults it's on a pay for outcomes-based, pay for performance model.
So, Nick, can I ask you a question then? So we've tried to make changes connected to our virtual school. Would it be better to make the changes associated in statute for the adult program so that they're not crossing paths, or no?
We might have to discuss that. This is structured very similar to the adult program. And the provision in there regarding the exemption from the part-time enrollment and maybe some oversight on my part with drafting that it wasn't in there for the full-time enrollment as well. But you'll see in that part-time enrollment, it specifically excludes students who are over 19 years of age. It excludes those adult students from receiving either full-time or part-time virtual state aid. And there's that change in paragraph 2 there that's doing the same for this program. So this program is structured similar to that adult program.
My apologies. Yep. It's not in italics or anything. Okay. All right. I got it. When we're finished with questions for Christian, I will invite Craig to come up and just speak to the Central Plains Adult Program and maybe correct anything that you've heard us say, since we've bounced around all over the place. And there seems to be a lot of, at least from my perspective, I don't have a lot of familiarity with the adult program. We seem to really focus on K through 12. So any more questions for Christian? Okay, well, yes, Representative Tarwater.
Okay, so this program started in 2020.
The Adult Workforce Diploma Program.
And you've graduated how many students?
So the printouts that I had provided the committee had said, I believe I had 345, but in the 2 days that I updated the dashboard, it had increased to 366. And the state only pays for outcomes received. It's not enrollment based.
So how many current students are enrolled? Do you know that number?
I'd have to get back to you on that number, but I can provide you that after the committee. I just have to look at that dashboard.
But your success rate is around 80%.
Well, so generally speaking, so I can tell you, I'd have to look at the exact number, but we have minimum graduation rates in order to maintain a certain level of accountability and transparency. So when it comes to adult workforce diploma bills, it's a minimum graduation rate of 50%. Generally, it tracks 60% and well above. I'd have to look at the exact Kansas numbers. I only had the number, well, and Central Plains might be able to provide that based on the number of enrolled students. But it by statute, it has to track at 50% or above to maintain a certain level of accountability. I should know Kansas, and I do apologize. I just did testimony in another state, and it was 67% graduation rate.
Okay, so then graduates of the program are obviously better off than non-graduates, just the plain dropout. Could you kind of draw a parallel between what does the average dropout cost the state of Kansas per se over their lifetime versus somebody that has a high school diploma?
Sure. So obviously, educational attainment is a very large economic driver, a large economic indicator. Generally speaking, there are studies out there that show that states in general, I can't speak specifically to Kansas, but that on average, that between social services, possible incarceration, lost income taxes paid, it's about $220,000 for the state for that dropout. But when you add in lost income over that person's entire lifetime of working, it's well over $750,000. It's, I think, $776,000 that costs the state when somebody drops out, when looking at their earning capacity and their earning potential over the course of their lifetime. So it's pretty significant.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, great, thank you. Any other questions for Christian? All right, Craig, would you mind just repeating anything you like? Take a few minutes, and just by maybe reiterating some of the things that Nick said or Christian said, and just focusing on the adult program in Kansas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I believe my task is not to confuse you anymore. I will try to do that. Maybe start from the beginning. For adult enrollment, and Nick covered most of this, in fact, all of it probably, the reason adult being 20 or over, the reason it is not tied to September 20th is because it's tied to credits, and on September 20th, the school district does not know how many credits that student's going to earn. So they give us an estimate with their enrollment count, so we know how to fund them through the year. And then in early June, they submit their report of this is how many credits each of these students earned. And we adjust their funding at that time, either up or down if their students earn more credits or less. There's a maximum of 6 credits for any one student because there are other sections of law you cannot be funded above a 1.0 student. So if the student earns 8 credits, great. They're moving towards graduation faster, but we can only fund the first 6. So the district reports to us in June, this is how many credits they earned, and we fund them accordingly. Everything has to be audited for student counts. So June obviously is too late to audit in that fiscal year. So they're audited in the following fiscal year, and we then make an adjustment to their enrollment, or to their funding at that time. So this year we are auditing the adult credits that were turned in last June. That's the way the process works for
Okay, I have a question.
partial credits.
Great explanation. Okay, so let's talk about this. As the bill is currently written, if you're in a district and you currently do credit recovery for students that have not dropped out, but just have a few classes they're failing and they fall, in the percentage guidelines, can they be enrolled in school and qualify as it's currently written?
I'll give you my opinion, and I should probably visit with Nick some more to clarify. Currently, whether they're behind on credits or not, we do have students that enroll both in the traditional school and in a virtual school. So they're part-time both places, and they are funded accordingly. So you can be funded as a 0.4 student in the traditional school with all the weightings and everything that go with it, and a 0.6 student in a virtual school. Perhaps a virtual school that's provided by that district, perhaps a virtual school that's provided by a different district. So that being the case, and this is where I'd need to clarify, Nick and I would have to visit a little bit. You could, if that particular student met the requirement of being 0.75 along on credits, so that they were behind on credits, I think they would qualify for under this bill, and they would be a part-time traditional student, just as they had been. They'd still be part-time virtual, but their funding in that situation would switch to the $709 per student instead of the $1,700 per FTE. If I'm making sense, and Nick's shaking his head, so I think maybe I'm interpreting that correctly.
At the risk,
I'm not sure if
at the
that's what
risk,
you were asking.
right, at the risk of causing more problems here, and this will be my last question, and I will take my questions offline for the rest. But for example, the Smoky Hill Education Service Center, they charge a fee of $300 per semester course, and it doesn't say anything about that students enrolled virtually or not virtually. So I'm assuming that I could be enrolled in high school, paid for, counted for, and I have failed a series of classes. And so I need some credit recovery. So would I be calling Smoky Hills? I mean, what I'm trying to do is understand, can this apply to students that are currently enrolled and currently funded by a current system that need credit recovery and are at risk of dropping out if they don't?
Can the current system fund that?
Well, actually, this bill says virtual student, so it specifies. So maybe that answers my question. It wouldn't work for that, but there are students right now that are in school that are taking recovery classes that are paid in another manner.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and so I guess the bottom line question is we are only targeting students that are enrolled or will enroll in a virtual school for this bill.
Yeah, I mean, they would have to enroll in the virtual school to participate in this program. So they would be enrolled in a virtual school, but then there's also, as Craig discussed, the potential that the student could be 0.4 in a school district, a brick and mortar, and then also part-time virtual. And since this doesn't apply for the adult students situation, this is kind of why this issue is boiling up, because now we're thinking of students who might be part-time enrolled in a brick and mortar, and then also doing credit recovery under this program as well. But they would be enrolled in the virtual school, but they could potentially also be enrolled in a.
Okay, and Craig was speaking to that, and so I'm not going to ask any more questions, but we do have 2 more questions, and then we will close this hearing. Representative Tarwater and then Representative Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So let's say we had a definition of dropout, and that definition was something like not enrolled anywhere to qualify for this program. That might clear things up, because I think we already have a program for people that are enrolled that need extra credits. This program basically takes the over 19 program and opens it up to others that are not enrolled, period. I think that might get us to where we probably need to be.
All right, like that suggestion. Nick's shaking his head. You like it?
I'm not shaking, I'm shaking my head because I'm listening and
Oh, okay.
contemplating how I would structure that definition. But might talk to some of the parties about that.
Okay.
Make sure that's.
We sure will. We don't need to craft it in front of everyone right here. Representative Estes for the last question.
Okay, so in my area, Orion Education that's a correct mental model for what you're describing.
Yes.
You're familiar with them, okay. So they are serving kids who have already completely dropped out, and they are serving kids who are trying to catch up.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe that's the right place where we put this, and we're just adding a virtual model to it, because it's going on, it's helping a lot of people. So I like the concept, and I hope we can figure out a neat place to put it.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you so much, Craig. With that, committee, we're going to go ahead and close the hearing on House Bill 2512. Please note there is a fiscal note in your folder, and we appreciate Christian for coming here today and giving your testimony. Thank you for Craig, and apologize for the confusion. We will figure it out. Next on our agenda, we have House Bill 2514. Before I open the hearing, I'll ask Nick, our reviser, to provide an overview.
Okay, committee, we talked about this just a little bit in the previous discussion. House Bill 2514, this bill would amend the compulsory student school attendance statute in KSA 723120, and this would require school districts to allow for the part-time enrollment of students who are enrolled in a private school or homeschool, and allow for that part-time enrollment in the school district for those students. This bill would require each Board of Education of a school district to adopt a policy to allow for this part-time enrollment and allow students those students who are enrolled in private or homeschool to attend any courses, programs, or services offered by the school district. What the bill would also provide is presumably there would be some requests of these part-time students to have blocks of time scheduled together to take certain courses or programs. So the bill provides that if school districts receive specific scheduling requests from part-time enrolled students, the school district would be required to make a good faith attempt to accommodate those requests, but would not be required to accommodate all such requests. The bill would also provide that a part-time enrolled student would be complying with the compulsory school attendance requirements as long as that part-time enrolled student is regularly enrolled both in that public school and also their private school for the duration of each school term. And I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Committee questions for Nick? Yes, Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Madam Chair. Page 4, it says, district to allow the student to attend any courses, programs, or services. I'm curious if that includes KSHA. Or would that be up to the district to interpret?
So this is specifically dealing with just the part-time enrollment at the district. I'm not exactly sure what KSHA requirements regarding part-time enrollment are of students who aren't full-time students and their eligibility for KSHA activities. But this would be specific to just the school district allowing a student to part-time enroll if that student is also enrolled in a non-public school in the state. I could look into the KSHA requirement for that type of.
Thank you. I'm just curious. Any courses, programs, or services offered by the school district? It raises a question with me. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure, I think KSHA, and at least in part, they have to be in good standing, so they have to be enrolled, they have to be taking courses. So if they're homeschooled, they would have to be actually registered. And so, I mean, that would be in part, not a complete answer, just a partial answer. Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add to that, unless KSHA has changed their rules, students have to be passing 5 classes. And it's assumed that they would be enrolled in those classes where they can be documented they're passing 5 to be involved in KSHA activities. So like in my field, that sometimes would come in play if we had a homeschool student who would come in to, say, take band. They could be a part of the class. We could take them on for concerts, but we couldn't take them to contests because contests are sponsored by KSHA, and we had to document they were enrolled in 5.
And I would note that the legislature has the ability to legislate over KSHA.
And I also believe we're going to be hearing a bill dealing with KSHA eligibility too. So again, Representative Owsley, according to Representative Byers, it sounds like KSHA requirements might somewhat limit, depending on how part-time you are, whether you can participate in an activity.
And it also might depend on whether or not the legislature requires enrollment, so that you are participating or you're passing 5 classes. If this were to pass and be successful, then it would need to apply to passing 5 classes, not necessarily in your public school, but 5 classes in your private school and your public school, or 5 classes in your private or your public school and your home school, and some realistic, reasonable way to indicate that. Other questions for Nick before we go on to our first proponent? All right, thank you, Nick. All right, committee, we have our first proponent here today, Maddie Ashworth, and she's the Deputy Legislative Director for Excellence in Ed in Action. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee, for having me here today. My pen escaped. My name is Madeline Webster. I'm really excited, or sorry, Madeline Ashore. As you can see, I'm really excited to be here to talk about this bill. What this bill does is create a big win for students and a big win for districts. Y'all already allow part-time enrollment on the books. You fund it on a proportional basis. What this bill does is make that opportunity that's available to some students right now available to every single student in the state. It's really rare that we get to talk about a bill that is a win for districts and a win for students, and that is what I wanted to say, and I'm really happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Madeline. Questions? Well, I will ask a question. Why do you think it's a win for both the school and the student?
So it's a win for the student because say you're a homeschool student, say you're in private school and you want to take AP Calculus 4, you want to be in a really advanced science class that has a lot of technical material needs. This bill would open up the opportunity for every kid in Kansas to go to their local public school and enroll just in that course. So it opens up a lot of opportunities for a lot of homeschool students. And I think in the pandemic, your homeschool population has ballooned quite a bit. I've heard estimates between 200,000 and 20,000. So that creates a lot of opportunities for those 20,000 kids. It's a win for districts because there's a financial incentive attached to it, right? If you bring a kid into your school on a part-time basis, you get reimbursed, I think, per minute or by minute for how much time that kid is spending with you. So it's a little extra funding for that district that engages.
Yes, and we do reimburse by part-time for students. Other questions? Representative Estes.
I just wanted to thank you. I had put some pen and paper to the win-win situation. If we're paying, and I rounded the numbers conservatively, if we're paying $16,000 for a student, we had 22,000 students drop out during the pandemic. That means that school districts are missing about $350 million. So to me, I think this is a good thing for school districts because it helps to replenish some of the economic hit that they might have been forecasting on having, and it also gives them a chance to reestablish the relationship with that family. So I see the win there, but I also see the win with a unique child gets a unique chance to get unique instruction. And certainly the last bill that we discussed has a lot of room for flexibility and meeting students where they are. And I think this is one more tool in that toolbox.
More questions for Madeline? All right, Representative Owsley.
Maybe not for Madeline, maybe for Nick, but I know there's been discussions of open public schools, you know, doing away with district boundaries. So I'd be curious how this bill applies to that. Would this be, you know, only for a district you reside in, or any district that you choose?
Well, just off the cuff, it would apply to if the open enrollment were passed, and we haven't gotten to that, and we haven't had a hearing on that, then school boards would be creating a policy based on capacity. And so again, it would be if a student wanted to go to that district that they weren't lined into, it would be based on their application through the process, through the board policy, and it would be up to the board to make that determination. And Nick, I'll let you.
How would this bill apply to district boundaries?
Nick.
So this bill doesn't change any of the other statutes relating to school district residency and the residence of the student. So schools, under this bill, schools where the student is going to a private school or is at the home school would be required to allow for that part-time enrollment for those students who live within district boundaries. And then, of course, depending on the arrangement made with an out-of-residence school district, schools could also allow for part-time enrollment of students that are out of their district. But this doesn't change that status quo in this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Revisor. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Byers.
And this question also is for Nick, kind of a follow-up to what Representative Owsley asked. When we're talking about those districts that have, for instance, multiple high schools, multiple middle schools, and we're talking about attendance area, would the same rules then apply for the attendance area since this bill specifically just says district? How would that work?
This bill doesn't touch that, and I don't know that state law really gets into specific district attendance areas. I think that would be a local decision. And I assume local districts would still apply that attendance area rationale to the attendance of part-time enrolled students as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Madeline? Madeline, great to have you. Thank you so much. I would like Craig to come up again if you would, because I think there are a few questions that we might have related to this as we all kind of consider this, how it might work with other bills that have been introduced in our committee. My question to you is how many districts or what percentage of districts currently right now allow part-time enrollment? And if you're not sure about that, can you tell us perhaps what the number of part-time enrollment students would be? Do we have any idea of those that don't make up one?
I believe we have the percentage of part-time enrollment or number of part-time enrollment students in our database. What it won't, it would only tell us, just to be clear, I think, whether the student's attending part-time or not. It will not tell us if they're part-time because they're also attending a private school part-time. They may be part-time because I'm a senior and I only need 3 courses.
Okay, but we don't count seniors. We give them the full-time status, correct?
No, if you enroll part-time, you're counted
Okay.
2/10, 4/10 to the nearest.
I guess if you're a senior and you're enrolled in concurrent courses, then you're still a full senior, plus you may be leaving part-time for college, but you're still enrolled full-time. Okay, so I would be interested to know what that number would be, because like I said, a lot of districts, they would allow it, but it's a case-by-case basis is how that's determined, so it's not a requirement. And I would also be interested if there are any administrators or superintendents that might be tuning into this, their viewpoints on this, because I do agree with our conferee who said that it can be a benefit. If you have a declining enrollment, or if you're in a rural area, you have a growing population of homeschooled kids, even bringing them in for part-time could be a boost to your bottom line. So I would just invite comments from schools on this topic. Anything else, committee? Craig's here. Okay, appreciate that. And committee, if you will notice that we do have written testimony in that was available to you. From Craig Holst, Director of State and Federal Government Affairs. Yes, every kid, so please take a look at that, as well as Elizabeth Patton. We do have also opponent testimony. It's written from Lauren Tice Miller, Director of Government Relations and Elections from KNEA. So I would encourage you to review the questions that were listed in this written testimony and maybe answer those yourself, or look for answers yourself if you are so inclined. If there are no other conferees here today that we may have missed, all right, I will go ahead and close the hearing on House Bill 2514. There will be no possible action on any previously heard bills, and I think we have concluded for the day, and we are setting a record. It is 4:34. We are adjourned.